Well, Excellencies, I think we can begin. We do have quorum, and let me say that it's, again, an honor and a privilege to welcome all of you to this Extraordinary Inter-Sessional Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific. I welcome all the participants for taking time, I know, out of your very busy schedules to be with us today for this first Extraordinary Inter-Sessional Summit of our organization, and indeed the sacrifice made by our colleagues, especially from the Caribbean and Pacific, who are attending this meeting with the time differences at an hour that is either very early in the morning or late into the evening. So I want to thank you. Let me also thank all those who are participating with us and are not going to basically participate in the discussions but are listening in with us. But also I'd like to recognize especially Your Excellency, the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. In the interest of time, I will proceed to the proposed program of the day. Our meeting, as we had discussed, is divided into two segments. The first segment will be an exchange and dialogue amongst ourselves, and this will immediately be followed by consultations with key strategic partners in the second segment. So, Excellencies, with your permission, I would like now to move and make some brief opening remarks as we proceed. So, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency Ambassador Dr. Jorge Robelo Pinto Chikoti, our Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen participating, I am really delighted to preside over the virtual summit of our Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States that is being held currently amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. When we met with some of you in December of 2019, we made the Nairobi Nguvu Pamoja Declaration. We didn't at that time realize just how important our strength would be in working together. Indeed, it is a challenging time for all of us, but I believe that together we will overcome. I also take this opportunity to welcome Ambassador Dr. Jorge Pinto Chikoti, our Secretary General. Our Secretary General was appointed during our 9th Summit of Heads of State and Government here in Nairobi, and he assumed his office in the 1st of March of this year. Your Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused major economic and social disruptions across the entire globe and has posed serious public health challenges and slowed down economic activity. As of the 31st of May 2020, persons within the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States reported infected by this disease were about 112,243, with approximately 3,026 deaths. While these numbers may seem relatively low in the context of the global numbers, the impact of COVID-19 on our economies is disproportionately high and in some cases has been totally devastating. Our industries have been hard hit especially, and our countries, especially those who focus a lot on aviation, travel, tourism and trade, economic disruptions in the European Union, which amounts for about 50% of ACP countries' exports, have also been disrupted through disruption of their supply chains. And in Africa, our economic growth is projected to decline from 2.4% in 2019 to between -2.1% and -5.1% in this year, 2020. In the Pacific region, Economic growth is also projected to slow down to 1% in 2020 from a high of 5.5% in 2019. For our Caribbean brothers and sisters, where tourism accounts for more than 30% of total GDP, economic growth is expected to drop by 1%. These numbers, Excellencies, reflect a dire economic situation for ACP countries. In addition to COVID-19, many of our countries are also simultaneously tackling other challenges. For us in the Eastern African region, we are experiencing an invasion of desert locusts as well as floods, while in the Caribbean and Pacific, the devastating effects of rising ocean water and the impacts attributed to the effects of climate change have continued to cause severe destruction. Almost all of our countries are struggling with a heavy debt burden that reduces fiscal room for maneuver. It is estimated that OACPS countries will require between 50 to 60 billion US dollars in 2020 to meet their international debt obligations. A core objective of our organization, therefore, is to serve as a forum for formulating and coordinating common positions on global issues, and COVID-19 is indeed one of those. We need to invoke this objective and affirm the OACP's solidarity and cooperation in mitigating the effects of COVID-19 pandemic for all our member states. I believe our deliberations today will help us address these issues. Today's Extraordinary Inter-Sessional Virtual Summit, themed Transcending the COVID-19 Pandemic, Building Resilience through Global Solidarity, accords us all, therefore, an opportunity to firstly assess the current global situation of COVID-19 and its effects in our member states. Secondly, to review opportunities and actions for immediate responses to COVID-19 pandemic. And thirdly, to identify opportunities for global solidarity and action. So in conclusion, and in the spirit of the Nairobi Nguvu Pamoja Declaration and the revised Georgetown Agreement, we must endeavor to enhance engagement with our development partners. And it is for this reason that we have scheduled a segment where we will dialogue with a select number of our strategic partners in the course of these deliberations, and I believe we will come up with concrete actions towards enhancing global solidarity and addressing COVID-19, as well as other related challenges. This is therefore a great opportunity for us to speak with one voice as we engage the global community to mobilize the support that we need to manage the pandemic. On my own behalf and on behalf of the people of the government of Kenya, I look forward to fruitful deliberations, and I want to once again thank all of you for finding time to participate with us, especially, as I said, those who are participating at some very early hours in the morning and others late in the evening. But I am sure that at the end of it, we will come up with solutions and a way forward to support our economies. I want to, at this stage, invite our Director General. No, sorry, let me begin first by giving the floor to our Secretary General for a few brief remarks. Secretary General Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I wish to thank Your Excellency, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, and President in Office of the OACPS Summit for convening this Extraordinary Inter-Sessional Summit on this pertinent subject, a matter of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on our member states and regions. I am honored to highlight the key deliverables that are in fact affecting our economies. Your Excellencies, since the creation of the OACPS, this is the first important gathering that Your Excellency has called. And indeed, as we face this challenge of the impact of the COVID-19 that affects all the economies of our countries, from the Caribbean to the Pacific through Africa, it is indeed the best moment that Your Excellencies and Your Excellency President Kenyatta has chosen that you should meet and discuss this important topic. The Secretariat here in Brussels has worked tirelessly to make sure that Your Excellencies can have this opportunity and time so that you can exchange and find ways that our countries and leaders can put forward either to present to our partners, but as well as to exchange so that we can solve the problems that deeply affect our societies. Your Excellency, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and you can proceed with your meeting, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And at this time, I'd like to give an opportunity to the man in the hot seat who has found time to join us, Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, and I want to thank the Director General for accepting our invitation to address this crucial summit, despite the very busy schedule that you have, but also allow me on behalf of my colleagues to commend you for the astute leadership that you have shown in the manner in which the World Health Organization continues to guide and assist our countries in their efforts to limit the spread of COVID-19 amongst our population, and remaining on the front line in supporting member states, especially the most vulnerable. The Director General, therefore, will now provide a brief situation on COVID-19 in our member states. Director General, you have the floor. Welcome, Dr. Tedros.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you. As I said earlier, I miss I miss home. So home meaning Jambo, Abariako. So this is a great opportunity to connect, actually, and thank you for inviting me. It should be me who should thank you for inviting me to join this very, very important meeting. Your Excellency, President Kenyatta, Excellencies, Heads of State, Heads of Government, and Secretary General Georges, it's an honor to join you today. I would like to thank the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States for its ongoing support for WHO. Our collaboration with OACPS, SCPS will become even stronger with an update of the Cotonou Partnership Agreement. The cooperation between SCPA and WHO is a model for the kinds of global solidarity we need to take on the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me brief you on the current situation. As of this morning, WHO has recorded more than 6 million cases around the world and more than 371,000 deaths. Of the 79 SCP countries, 12 have not reported any cases and 38 have reported under 500 cases. We are fortunate that many SCP countries have not had as high caseload as we had feared. This is testament to the good work done by countries and regions with long experience in disease outbreaks, and you have taken measures swiftly, and that's helping. But we must not let down our guard. We still have a long way to go, and many risks remain. And as you know, the regions of SCP are actually very vulnerable due to many reasons, although still the number of cases is the lowest compared to other regions. WHO is working hard, leading the international effort to ensure that all countries have timely access to high quality, affordable diagnostics, medicines, vaccines, and other essential technologies. But technology itself is never enough. Countries must take a comprehensive approach, find, isolate, test, and care for every case, and trace and quarantine every contact. We need to continue this comprehensive approach. All of this must be done while maintaining essential health services. Our latest estimates show that suspensions of vaccination and prevention programs for diseases like HIV, measles, polio, malaria, and many others could put millions of children and adults at risk. WHO has issued guidance on all of these issues, along with dozens of other guidelines for preparing, responding to, and rebuilding from the pandemic. COVID-19 is a brutal reminder that the time to ready ourselves for outbreaks and other health emergencies is before the crisis hits. The impact on lives, livelihoods, and the economy, as His Excellency President Kenyatta said, is clear illustration that preparedness is not a cost, it's an investment, and that the most costly thing of all is to do nothing. Strong health systems that are accessible and affordable to all is the only way forward. Universal health coverage is at the core of global health security and resilience. We cannot afford to go back to business as usual. We must rethink how we have been doing things and build back better. That includes investing in green technologies, water and sanitation infrastructure, and health workers. Right now, WHO and OACPS need to continue to expand the work we're doing together, such as our efforts to strengthen health systems in more than 80 SCP and Asian countries. I know there are also further opportunities for partnership with the European Union and SCP countries, as well as many recommendations to act upon from the second WHO Africa Health Forum. We're continuing our work to push for sharing and equity. Just last week, WHO launched the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, or CTAP, to voluntarily share health technology, intellectual property, and data. And Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister Motley, was the lead in that launching, and I would like to use this opportunity to appreciate her leadership. The CTAP builds on SCT Accelerator, which we have set up to speed the development, production, and equitable distribution of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics for COVID-19. Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, I will leave you with 3 requests. Number 1, solidarity. His Excellency President Kenyatta had already said it. As you can see, globally, there is a crack, especially between powers, and the virus is exploiting that differences or crack. I think we have to quarantine COVID politics and work together. If we don't have effective solidarity globally, the virus will stay with us for a very long period, and it will continue to wreak havoc. So one thing together that you can do is to bring the world together, to work together, because the crack will be exploited by the virus. The second is we urge you to do your utmost to ensure that essential health services are maintained and strengthened throughout the pandemic and beyond. And finally, when loosening public health measures, many of your countries are already doing that, it's critical to take a phased approach with safeguards and monitoring. Otherwise, there is a high risk of resurgence. So we need the comprehensive approach, the find, isolate, test, etc., while opening. It has to continue. Once again, thank you for your commitment and support. I assure you that WHO is committed to work with all of your countries to promote health, keep the world safe, and serve the vulnerable. From the 3 recommendations I made, I will repeat the first one. I would really like your voice to bring the world together. Without solidarity and with the division we see, the virus will wreak havoc. And I hope you will convince, especially the major leaders, the major countries, to work together and lead. Because, as you know, smallpox was eradicated during the Cold War, when Soviet Union and US agreed to work together and pulled the whole world together. And you also know that the 2008 economic meltdown was addressed because the whole world came together. In COVID, we're not seeing that. The world is divided. So making sure that solidarity comes back to really fight this virus is very, very important. And that's why I'm stressing on the #1 request, which is giving and stressing and making sure that there is solidarity to end this pandemic. Thank you so much again. Asante, asante sana, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros, for that very useful information and the emphasis especially on solidarity. And once again, we continue to thank you for the great work that you're doing on all our behalves. Thank you, Dr. Tedros.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, moving now to the next item on our agenda. This is an opportunity for us to discuss the challenges that face our member states and regions, as well as to understand some of the innovative and strategic initiatives that leaders have put in place to address the COVID-19 pandemic in their various regions. So I will now open the floor for statements that will be delivered in the order of the program. And I'd like to begin with our friend and my chairman, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa and Chairman of the African Union. Cyril, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President Kenyatta, Your Excellency, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Secretary General of the OACPS, His Excellency Mr. Georges Chikoti, Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, colleagues and friends. I wish to express my appreciation to His Excellency President Kenyatta for convening this very important summit on an issue that is deeply affecting to each one of us. The coronavirus pandemic has clearly demonstrated that the nations of the world are profoundly interconnected and are also in many ways interdependent. As an organization that brings together countries from different parts of the globe, the OACPS has an important role in promoting cooperation and solidarity. And that is why we are rather grateful that this summit has been put together. As the countries of Africa, we have acted decisively and in unison to respond to the threat of COVID-19. Although the number of infections on our continent, Africa, is currently lower than elsewhere in the world, there is an expectation that the worst is still to come, with dire social and economic consequences. The outbreak of the virus has caused a great deal of damage to economies on the continent and is beginning to stretch public health systems in many countries. We have urgent needs as a continent with regard to medical supplies, testing equipment and facilities, laboratories, personal protection equipment, and equipment such as ventilators. At the same time, our experience in managing public health emergencies has served us well, and it has enabled the rapid deployment of trained and experienced community health workers to do screening and testing. The African Union has developed a strategy to address the challenge of COVID-19. Through the 5 regional coronavirus task forces we have established in all the 5 regions of our continent, we are working across the national borders to oversee screening, detection, and diagnosis, infection control and clinical management of infected persons, and also to drive mass communication and community engagement. As part of our strategy, we've established an African COVID-19 Response Fund as a key intervention to mobilize and direct resources towards the continent's response to this challenge. COVID-19 is a global pandemic and requires cooperation as well as solidarity amongst the nations and the peoples of the world. The AU has been in the forefront of mobilizing international support for both a health response to the pandemic as well as a comprehensive economic stimulus package for Africa. As part of the economic stimulus, we've called for debt relief not only for African countries, but for many countries around the world that are indebted. We call on the OACPS to support the AU's call for a 2-year debt still and a plan for the restructuring of both private and bilateral debt. We further support the appeal of the International Monetary Fund for special drawing rights allocations to provide additional liquidity to countries that are in need. The World Health Organization has been instrumental in supporting national efforts to combat COVID-19. As African countries, we continue to reiterate our full support for the World Health Organization, as well as support for its Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. We fully support the initiative by the WHO, together with many governments, nonprofit organizations, and industry leaders, to speed up the development and the production of vaccines, as well as therapeutics, and to ensure that they are distributed speedily and equitably across the globe. We believe that no country must be left behind. In this regard, we call on the lifting of sanctions against Sudan and Zimbabwe, and that they should be provided space as countries to devote their resources to fight against COVID-19. This is a public health emergency and it needs a global response. We therefore need to promote multilateralism as the most effective instrument to ensure that all countries, big and small, rich and poor, are accommodated and that their voices are also heard. Now, through a decisive, effective, and collective response to this global crisis, we will not only be safeguarding the lives and health and well-being of our people, but we will also be proving the relevance and the value of bodies such as the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. Global solidarity also demands that we should also stand as one against all forms of racism and intolerance. Through the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Musa Faki Mohammed, the AU has strongly condemned the murder of George Floyd in the United States of America and shares the anger of millions of people in the United States and across the world. As countries that have borne the brunt of racial discrimination and oppression over centuries, we need to work together to end the scourge of racial violence wherever it occurs in any country in the world. By working together, we can build a peaceful, just, healthy, and prosperous global community. And this is what solidarity means. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Cyril, for that statement. And indeed, I'm sure we all join you in the support to ensure an end to racialism in whatever form in any part of the world. So thank you very much, Cyril. We really appreciate that. And I would like now to give the floor to Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados and Chair of CARICOM. And once again, Mia and our brother Andrew and all of you in the Caribbean, thank you. I know it's very early in the morning, but we appreciate that you have taken time to join us for this meeting. Thank you. Mia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, my brother. I promise you that I do things for you that I don't do for a lot of people. So I'm up early this morning for you. But I want to thank you and also to thank the Secretary General Chikoti for this, his first Summit of Heads. And of course, our brother, Dr. Tedros, who has been carrying the battle for all of us across the world by ensuring that the WHO is that entity, along with PAHO and CARFA, to right-size, literally, our access as small states in this world. My brother, almost 6 months ago when we met in your beautiful city in Nairobi, I posed the question, does the ACP at this point of our destiny stand as a fast track to the future, or is it a relic of the past? My conclusion then was that the ACP had to be a main platform for our economic growth and development, that we had to coalesce our efforts and strengthen our partnerships so as to ensure our future, that we had to recognize that we are always stronger together, and further, that we have an obligation, which still remains outstanding, to settle a new and humane framework for dealing with migrants, particularly given the ever-increasing problem of the numbers of persons being displaced as a result of the climate crisis, and I suspect as we go forward as a result of this pandemic. Little did we know in December last year the extent to which this world would have changed in just a few months. The challenges which now confront our membership due to this pandemic are a true test of the spirit and the letter of this revised Georgetown Agreement and the guiding tenets of our Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, tenets which are based fundamentally on the principles that we have heard so much about and will continue to hear about: solidarity, unity, and partnership. We once thought that advancing our global engagement as an international organization would represent a platform of the acceleration of our integration into the world economy. We now know that our organization, as we said in December, must be a central platform for our joint action to ensure our very survival and that of our people. The revised Georgetown Agreement therefore requires of us to advocate for a multilateral system which contributes to our economic growth and our sustainable development, and to strengthen our political identity as a coherent force in the international arena in order to advance the interests of our membership. In our declaration, which we declared the Nairobi and Pajoma Declaration, we committed to focus on multilateralism, sustainable development, and growth. The COVID-19 crisis has shown, as you have said, my brother, undoubtedly, that we cannot afford to allow multilateralism to die. The global threats, the global diseases, the global crises, all require multilateral collaboration, commitment, and responses. Our organization, 79 states, that is more than a third of the world's states. And we meet today to demonstrate our willingness and our readiness to offer solutions and to call for global solidarity in combating this pandemic, and indeed in combating any future global challenges through better preparedness, prevention, and response. Today's virtual summit is an important extension of the work that we started in Nairobi in December. And I commend you again, my brother, for your foresight and initiative in convening this meeting, which will be remembered, I guarantee, for being an impetus for a truly global solution to the biggest crisis of our time. This is the leadership that the world has been asking for and needs right now. And as the largest bloc of developing states spanning 3 regions, and we all have reflected on the time zones, our organization has the authority and the credibility to champion the call for global solidarity for action. Indeed, when we spoke in December, we reflected that our organization cannot be limited now by trade arrangements with former colonial powers. Now is the moment for coordinated global leadership. And I have called for a global leadership initiative that brings together not just governments, but other people of influence, because it is the behavior of individuals that has to change. And hence, it is not only the voice of governments that we need at this point in time. Indeed, we have recognized that that global leadership initiative, particularly in this 75th year after the United Nations was formed, is critical, since the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions reflected a world that is far different today from what existed at the time when those arrangements were settled. Most of our countries were not even independent at that point in time. The interdependence, therefore, of the world since then has been magnified even more by this COVID-19 pandemic that has spread with rapidity throughout our world simply because of the global interconnectedness of our countries and our people. At its inception, the ACP group was primarily focused, as I said, on trade. So when we move now to a situation where we can have global, comprehensive, and inclusive activities, and the extent to which the recovery of one country is linked to the recovery of others today, we know that our organization must play a wider role. And we know it because 54% of the world's GDP comes from trade among countries. Therefore, the well-being of our individuals and our citizens across our countries depends on the strength and continuance of trade that has been disrupted by this COVID-19 pandemic. Half of the world trade, we all know, is in intermediate goods, and therefore failure to produce in one part of the world makes it impossible to finish the goods in another part of the production system. The WTO projects that world trade will decline between 13% to 32% due to COVID. Therefore, recovery of economic growth and jobs in one country cannot be achieved without recovery of economic growth in other countries that provide either the goods or alternatively purchase the goods. In other words, we must recover together, and we must protect our future prosperity by protecting the interests of all of us. This is the only way that the world can move forward, in solidarity. Truly global recovery requires, as we have said, leaving no country behind in the recovery process. And if the necessary tools to achieve this recovery are made available to all countries, then we can at least guarantee that support. We have to ask ourselves, are we going to act as if our interests are served by maximizing profit and hoarding vaccines for the wealthy or more powerful nations? Or will we recognize that this moment requires that our best interests lie in finding a vaccine which we will agree to mass produce in multiple locations and distribute affordably to speed up the protection of all peoples and to consequently hasten global economic recovery and growth. We want to thank Dr. Tedros for the launch of the global collaboration to accelerate the development, production, and equitable access to new COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, so that the issue of our participation in any professional consortium created to access these in vitro diagnostics is fundamental to us countries who are being excluded for being middle-income countries, but yet whose countries are too small to command any access in the market, especially when there's evidence of market failure. The Caribbean community, which I have the honor to represent today, and by extension the CARIFORUM group, with which we share inherent characteristics, are especially vulnerable to the impact of COVID-19, not just in terms of the number of cases and regrettably those deaths that have happened, even though they are few in comparison to other regions. It is the economic impact that is going to be our greatest challenge. For the Caribbean is the world's most trade and travel dependent region. In many places, tourism represents close to or more in some instances of 50% of GDP and also employment. The actions taken by members of the global community and ourselves to contain the spread of the pandemic are resulting in the most substantial contraction in economic activity since the Great Depression and the riots in the 1930s, and the cut is disproportionately deeper for many of us. We remain committed to paying the economic costs, however, to ensuring that we protect the health and lives of our citizens and shore up our public health systems, because we cannot replace lives. We simply cannot. But at the same time, an equally strong economic response is needed. We find it almost impossible, however, to do both with respect to the protection of lives and livelihoods in the circumstances in which we find ourselves globally. We simply do not have the fiscal space to marshal an economic stimulus the size and scope that our developed partners can secure or that we need. I want to remind my brothers and sisters as colleague heads that the Caribbean Development Bank has forecast a collapse in Caribbean economies, with declines in some countries ranging from as low as 11% to as much as 30% in those tourism-dependent countries. The economic contraction makes this region utterly exposed, and the projected decline across many of these countries mirrors that of the economic decline of many European countries during World War II. That decline then led to a Marshall Plan being settled to ensure that those states did not become failed states. We ask our brothers and sisters to take note of this fact and to recognize that this can no longer be the subject of politely listened to speeches and repetitive pleas to a world that is not yet hearing or not yet seeing us. Our small states have been suffering from high debt and low growth for decades. And we believe that there should be mature and relevant conversations from middle-income, small island developing states across the globe as it relates to our debt obligations in the midst of this pandemic. We will either have an orderly restructuring of debt, or at the very least, a debt moratorium that provides certainty for both borrower and lender, or we will have a disorderly unraveling that will create a crisis both within our countries and the financial markets. Emergency fiscal measures, I repeat, including debt relief, are needed to relieve the pressure on the highly indebted states of the Caribbean and avert another crisis of deep and long-term impoverishment of our people. And I'm not speaking for Barbados because we have fundamentally restructured most of our debt. I'm speaking for my brothers and sisters in the region whose profile as countries have too high a debt to GDP ratio and who have little room to maneuver. Even as we therefore battle with the social and economic ravages of COVID, we continue to face the fact that this is hurricane season. June 1st has passed, And for us, the Atlantic hurricane season this year is expected to be active and an above average season. We pray that this is a false prediction. In addition, we are confronted with the recent unilateral action taken at this critical time in Europe to place members of our regional group in Barbados, Bahamas, Jamaica, a number of us, Ghana, on a shame list of high-risk third states deemed to have strategic deficiencies in anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regimes that are supposed to pose significant threats to the financial system of the European Union. We reject that. But more so, we'd say that this is in spite of the fact that those nations whose names I've called and others in that shame list have already committed to working with the Financial Action Task Force on matters that are largely regulatory, and in some instances, in the case of Jamaica and Barbados, depend on money supply and technical issues, but are not reflective of the scale of risk associated with a list of shame. It is our view that the list was not established in a transparent process with clear and concrete benchmarks. No one spoke to us. We read it in the international media. No one sent a diplomatic démarche to us, nor did it respect our right to be heard or allowed to prioritize ongoing reforms that we are doing to avoid being listed by anybody. The governments, my friends, of the Caribbean region reiterate their unequivocal commitment to cooperate with all states in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing. That cooperation requires recognition by all of our sovereign rights under international law and respect by the European Union for the principles of good faith, equal treatment, non-discrimination, and due process, values which we share with the European Union. Left unchecked, the action taken by the EU would further decimate our economies, since our financial and international business sectors are key engines of growth for us in the Caribbean, and I must confess to you, was the only sector yet untouched by COVID until this unfortunate action was taken with the publication of this shame list. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I must repeat the Caribbean's call for a revised vulnerability index. Even when our circumstances deteriorate like now, there is no review or assessment mechanism that takes into account our inherent vulnerabilities. And despite these acute vulnerabilities, the region is being denied access to the support being given to those as vulnerable, or even less so, because of an outdated and ill-suited definition of vulnerability, namely historic GDP per capita. I have already said that it is flawed largely because it is like taking my blood pressure from 2 years ago and using it to determine my vulnerability to a stroke this afternoon. It is totally futile. Almost 30 years ago, we recognized that GDP per capita was a flawed measure, and we repeated it when we met in Nairobi in December. We, like others, feel now that who are now reflecting their plight and their anger as citizens who have not been seen and who have not been heard, and who are now taken to the streets in the United States of America, they are reflecting their anger and disappointment as a result of the fact of not being seen and not being heard. We small island states know the feeling only too well, for we feel that we sound like a stuck record, and we recognize that no system that is ignored forever can flourish, and hence we find sympathy for the actions taken by those in the United States of America who are simply asking, in the words of Peter Tosh, for justice. It is clear, my brothers and sisters, that we need additional criteria to determine equitable access and fair allocation that truly measures our vulnerability in the middle of a pandemic and at the start of a hurricane season. I therefore warmly welcome the work recently undertaken by the Caribbean Development Bank to develop indices to assess the economic, social, and environmental vulnerability of borrowing member states. The bank's conclusion is that the multidimensional vulnerability index reveals that although many of our countries under review are classified as middle income, the economic security of these countries is highly vulnerable due to small size, economic and social structures, and openness to exogenous and natural disaster-related shocks. This evidence-based framework will be an important tool to assist us in determining development priorities and advocating access to affordable financial resources to build our resilience. My friends, I ask you to join hands with us and to allow us as one people coming together initially to unite, to develop trade relations with our colonial partners, to recognize that we are long past that moment, and that the moment that lies before us now is the moment for solidarity, for partnership, and for unity in matters that are fundamental to our survival as successful states for our people. I therefore ask that this high-level session means something in mobilizing us to greater action, not just within the ACP, but in particular in other multilateral fora where we now have to demand a redesign of definitions and criteria to meet our circumstances. My brother, I thank you. Asante Sana. I had hoped to have been in Kenya in June at the CARICOM AU Summit, but I trust and pray that not even COVID can divide us from the centuries of separation that have taken us away from you. I thank you. Asante Sana.
Thank you very much, dear sister, Prime Minister of Barbados, for that very inspiring statement and very clear message to our development partners. I now would like to welcome the Pacific region to join us, and once again, I want to thank our brothers and sisters from the Pacific, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Tuvalu, my brother from the Fiji, and also from Papua New Guinea. I know it's very late in the evening there, almost 11 o'clock at night, but you have found time to join us, and I'd like at this stage to welcome you to our session by giving the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kausea Natano, Prime Minister of Tuvalu, and also the Chair of the Pacific Forum. Prime Minister, welcome to our meeting. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, Chair of the Summit, distinguished heads of states and governments of the Organization of the African, Caribbean and Pacific States, OACPS, the presidents and prime ministers of our key development partners, heads of development and technical agencies, excellencies. It is my privilege to speak on behalf of the Pacific ACP states and contribute to today's discussion. We are living in unprecedented times where we must stand together in solidarity and face the challenges presented to us. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted us all. The Blue Pacific region has registered close to 9,000 cases of COVID-19, with over 100 deaths thus far. Of the 15 Pacific ACP states, only 2 have reported case of COVID-19 patients, with no related fatalities. As the COVID-19 pandemic threatened the Pacific region, we were quick in closing our borders, taking precautionary measures for the safety of our populations and preventing a public health catastrophe. We are saddened by the global loss of life and convey our condolences and prayers to those affected. Excellencies, we need to maintain our resolve in the fight against the COVID-19 crisis. In my role as chair of the Pacific Island Forum, in providing a coordinated collective response to the COVID-19 crisis, I activated an important Pacific regional instrument for joint security, the Picatawa Declaration. This declaration recognizes that in time of crisis, all actions must be taken on the basis that all members of the Forum are part of the Pacific Islands extended family. On 7th April 2020, the foreign ministers of the Pacific Islands Forum established the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway for COVID-19. The Pacific Humanitarian Pathway is overseen by Ministerial Action Group and supported by a regional task force. It works with and complements existing health and coordination mechanisms in the region. The Pacific Humanitarian Pathway ensures political coordination on COVID-19. Members' requests for medical and humanitarian assistance are addressed in a timely, safe, and effective manner, and national efforts are not undermined. To date, the pathway has facilitated delivery of testing kits, personal protective equipment, and ventilators to the Pacific. As we work to restart our economies, foreign protocols are in development for the movement of freight and passengers. These protocols will support greater certainty on how COVID-19 risks will be minimized. Closing our borders allows the Pacific region to contain the spread of COVID-19, but this has come at great cost to our economies. Many businesses have closed, and our Pacific islands that rely heavily on tourism are suffering. Recession is anticipated region-wide. Excellencies, our already challenged economies are under great strain, and unless multilateral support is provided, some of our economies may collapse. We need to invest in our health systems as a matter of urgency, equipping nations with test and trace capacity, and investing in more hospital beds and intensive care facilities. In addition to caring for local population, our many tourism-dependent economies need these health facilities to manage a resurgence of COVID-19. These investments are an absolute necessity, and I call on the international community to assist as a matter of priority. In addition, the development of a vaccine to prevent and medication to treat COVID-19 is of crucial importance. Now, more than ever, a coordinated and effective response is necessary to stimulate development. Cross-border solutions may be necessary as many of our economies are small. We need the support of the development partners and multilateral funding agencies to access financial resources and set up stimulus packages for economic growth. We join the international call for innovative solutions to address debt relief and debt sustainability. The vulnerability of our Blue Pacific to COVID-19 is compounded by our vulnerability to climate change. While responding to a pandemic, 4 of the Pacific ACP states were hit by a severe tropical cyclone in April 2020, causing major damage and loss of life. Excellencies, climate change remains the biggest crisis facing humanity in the long term. Let me take this opportunity to urge the international community not to lose sight of this reality. The COVID-19 public health emergency and its ensuing humanitarian and economic fallout offers the world a glimpse of what the global climate change emergency can become, if it is left unchecked and if ambitious action is not taken now. The COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated the persistent vulnerabilities and dependencies that continue to challenge our development. As we design our responses to this crisis, we must consider climate-smart response and recovery measures. We need to shape national economies and societies in ways that are healthy, clean, safe, and more resilient. In the Pacific region, given our heavy dependence on imports, a concerted effort is being made to support sustainable agricultural economies, particularly smallholder and backyard farming. We need to strengthen inclusiveness, improving gender and youth participation when designing our solutions, and increase the involvement of the rural communities in shaping our development. We must not let the COVID-19 crisis hinder progress on the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me conclude by saying we have to build resilience through global solidarity. It is important for OACPS an organization of 79 states to promote our values of solidarity and collaboration, especially in these times of crisis. This week marks 45th year of our existence as the ACP group. We have supported each other in times of needs over the past decades, and our development partners have also stepped up to assist us when we needed them. We need that solidarity to continue, now more than ever. I thank you.
We thank Prime Minister Natano of Tuvalu and Chair of the Pacific Forum very much for that statement and what the Pacific Forum is doing in this particular moment in time. We will now move to the troika of the summit of ACPs, and I'd like now to give the floor to His Excellency James Marape, Prime Minister of the Independent States of Papua New Guinea and President of the 8th Summit of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. Welcome, Your Excellency.
All right, good evening, everyone. From Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, Your Excellency President Kenyatta, Your Excellencies, Head of States and Governments, Secretary General of OACPS. I acknowledge also the Director General of WHO. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And let me firstly congratulate you in organizing this very special session and for providing the leadership. I was not present in person to formally hand over the leadership of the summit to you last December, but my Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable David Stephen, was there on my behalf and did brief me on the outcome of the summit under your excellent leadership. Let me take this opportunity also to congratulate the new Secretary General and commend him and his team for keeping our group functional in these very, very difficult times. Mr. Chairman, this special session of the summit is timely in order to exchange views on COVID-19 that has crippled the world in the last few months and has affected our member states in varying degrees as well. Mr. Chairman, in Papua New Guinea, we took very early steps with advice from our health experts and in consultation with WHO representatives, including controlling our air, sea, and land entry ports. We were in total shutdown for the 2 months commencing on the 24th of March 2020. The shutdown included the declaration of a state of emergency shortly after the first imported case was declared. It is hoped that the national state of emergency will be lifted in the next 2 weeks, and our parliament is meeting at the moment to pass a public health emergency act that will declare the new normal in as far as protocols on how our country will live with COVID-19 going into the future. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, we allowed many of our businesses and companies who operate in our area to work and function in the last 2 months when we were in shutdown. And as most of you in your countries will experience, COVID-19 did affect our economy, which is heavily dependent on extractive industries, as well as our small tourism market that keeps our country going. The measures we took looked harsh and oppressive in the first instance, but I am thankful up till today, our country had only 8 proven cases of COVID-19, and note that as we speak. We have commenced a phase of reopening our economy, Mr. Chairman. However, our entry ports remain closed and are very, very strictly protected as we slowly try to reopen for business, and especially taking in international flights. As I speak today, we only allow international flights off coming in from Australia. Mr. Chairman, the preventive measures my government took and put in place have resulted like many of you in your countries, a huge cost on our economy. However, we believed that cost of our economy is nothing compared to a loss of life. Hence, we had to take these very, very strong, tough measures. Mr. Chairman, that is simply because a developing country like Papua New Guinea, our health system is very, very weak, and we cannot cope with COVID-19 if it was to get out of hand, and we had to take these extreme measures. And I think this conversation taking place today, it gives me comfort knowing that we are not isolated in the Pacific group of nations trying to cope with what is happening globally. And today and tonight's conversation gives comfort that we as a group of nations, we are looking for a common platform, not only in COVID-19, but more importantly, in the areas of trade, commerce, and economy. Mr. Chairman, given our vulnerabilities to social and economic disruptions, we still, and for PNG's perspective, remaining vigilant to what we must do going forward. And as I said earlier, our parliament is passing a specific act of parliament that will look into ensuring that our people live, work, travel, and go to school with the sensitivity of COVID-19. This will involve how we tailor our international travels as well as domestic travels. It will also impinge on some of our rights as individuals in our economy, but as I said earlier, Mr. Chairman, nothing comes second to the price of saving a human life in the face of total exposure to COVID-19 and its deadly effects on our human population. Speaking and having heard from every one of you, Mr. Chairman, Papua New Guinea would like to contribute to this conversation to our group of nations on something that we feel we have an element of contribution. We proposed early on that the Endowment Trust Fund must be established amongst our group of nations. We believe such time this sort of fund, if it exists, or this sort of facility can be used to draw all our nations together, not only for economic interventions, but to mobilize and assist each other in areas of medical needs and scientific needs as well. Mr. Speaker, I would like to, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman, I was just coming out of Parliament today and I'm addressing you as Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. In closing, I'd like to commend WHO. I know WHO Director General is listening in. A country like mine cannot continually function in the face of global adversity like this without the help of international assistance. And WHO has been a very strong partner with us. And I'd like to appeal to WHO that many nations, as those of us in the Pacific and Caribbean and Africa, remains vulnerable to this sort of global pandemic. And WHO must stand very close in ensuring that we receive support on time. I give you one Papua New Guinean experience. We were running short on PPE, and we were placed in the queue of PPE procurements. These are classical cases of small nations standing totally exposed in the entire marketplace globally when we're contesting for resources or we're contesting for manufactured products. And in the case of PPEs, unlike WHO, as you have been doing, keep a very close space for small vulnerable states in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, in as far as mobilizing resources and assistance is concerned. Mr. Chair, lastly but not the least, let me thank you for this special session of the summit. It is a timely conversation for this collective group. We can pull together, work together, assist each other. And I'd like to encourage that member states, especially the 79 member states of our group, working together in the South-South cooperations we've established, the North-South triangular corporations, together, working side by side, learning from each other, we can overcome this sort of perversity and pandemic. And going into the future, mobilizing support and networking amongst ourselves, I think is the way to go. I encourage for our group of nations to exist and coexist going into the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for organizing and giving me the opportunity to speak at this auspicious meeting. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that statement. And once again, on behalf of all our colleagues, I really want to say we truly appreciate you staying up at this very late hour in order to participate with us. And we are really very grateful for your contribution. Thank you very much. I would like now to give the floor to His Excellency Adam Barrow, President of the Republic of Gambia, and also the Gambia holds the current chair of the ACP Ministerial Council. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and an honor seeing you again after a long time. The coronavirus is trying to separate us, but I think technology is doing a very good job in helping us to come together. But Mr. President, I think if we are together, we can overcome this pandemic in a very short period of time. So thank you very much, and I'll seize this opportunity also for giving us the floor. Excellencies, distinguished head of state and government, chair of the African Union, chair of CARICOM, chair of Pacific Forum, ladies and gentlemen, as we hold this summit on transcending COVID-19 pandemic, building resilience through global solidarity, it is important to place the human being at the center of our deliberations. The impact of the pandemic on human lives and livelihoods is extremely destructive. It has disrupted the momentum and gains made towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and other development targets. Like other countries, the Gambia has adopted measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus. These include declaring a state of public emergency, observing WHO regulations, and mitigating the impact of such strict measures on the public. Already, however, the pandemic has impacted severely on both the formal and informal sectors of our economy. The need to pay due attention to both sectors is urgent, noting that our informal sector contributes crucially towards sustaining livelihoods and to GDP. In short, the impact on employment, government revenue, and the subsistence of the people is immensely negative. Undoubtedly, the containment measures will have multiple effects in both urban and rural settings. Economically, women and the youth are the most vulnerable groups, as their income-generating activities center heavily on the tourism, fisheries, and artisanal industries. It is imperative, therefore, that we seize this opportunity to call upon our development partners to collaborate with us to respond effectively to the economic challenges posed by COVID-19. With respect to SDG 11 on sustaining our settlements, this is particularly relevant for such vulnerable groups. Similarly, we must outline strategies and action points to minimize disruption to the food and agriculture systems, while adequately supporting the livelihoods of all vulnerable groups. The collaboration and support of technical agencies, such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, are vital to address challenges in the value and agri-food supply chains. Furthermore, sustaining agricultural production and strengthening need urgently for member states whose economies rest heavily on commodity export and food imports. Your Excellency, dear colleagues, financing development should be central to discussion on building resilient economies and advancing social inclusion and development. Thus, addressing the debt burden on developing countries. Expanding fiscal space and fostering domestic resource mobilization are essential to strengthen our socio-economic systems. Excellencies, unfortunately, we have noted with grave concern the recent unilateral publication of the EU list of high-risk third countries on anti-money laundering and terrorist financing effective 4th October 2020. Such blacklisting will adversely affect the economic recovery strategies of many of our member countries in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic and further impact on investments, financial aid, and cross-border financial transactions within our organization. We therefore call upon the EU and other development partners to cooperate with our member countries, especially in these difficult times. Ultimately, loss of income to producers and service providers will be greater on cross-border and regional threats. In particular, women entrepreneurs in this venture will be hard hit by the pandemic, with its effects tripling on domestic households. As an organization, we have the opportunity to leverage our individual comparative advantages to lay the foundation for manufacturing and trade diversifications. Your Excellency, dear colleagues, the Gambia welcomes global efforts to strengthen our health systems for universal health coverage and to boost our emergency preparedness capacity beyond COVID-19. While these initiatives are laudable, emphasis must be put on furthering intra-ACP collaboration, cooperation and sharing innovative medical approaches, research and treatment among member states. It is equally important to identify means of improving and increasing early warnings and response systems that match WHO standards. Amid all this, solidarity is critical to overcome our common challenges and achieving our objectives. Allow me, Excellencies, to conclude by expressing my heartfelt felicitation and the Gambia's unwavering support to my dear brother, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, and President in Office of the Summit for convening this very timely event. I also congratulate the Committee of Ambassadors and the Secretariat of OACPS on successfully putting this virtual summit together. I wish the organization fruitful deliberations. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, President Barrow, for that statement, and we appreciate the sentiment of support towards the solidarity that we seek. Excellencies, we'll now move to the third part of our discussions, which is really a discussion on key global solidarity actions. Indeed, as we address the resulting challenges, it remains critical that the spirit of solidarity be at the center of our efforts, because this is what will help us resolve and meet the needs of our populations in these very vulnerable situations. I will now open up the floor for statements, which will be delivered in order of the program. And I take this opportunity to give the floor to His Excellency Frank Bainimarama, Prime Minister of Fiji, but also once again to say thank you, Prime Minister. I know it's very late in the night in the Fiji, but you have found time to participate with us. Welcome, and you have the floor, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellencies. Excellencies Mbula Menaka from Fiji. I'd like to extend a special jumbo to my friend, His Excellency President Kenyatta. During my time in Kenya, you were an excellent host and an invaluable ally to Fiji's climate action advocacy. I'm proud to stand with you in a common cause yet again as we look to transcend the challenge of COVID-19. Excellencies, yesterday marked the start of hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin, and I pray our sisters and brothers across Africa and in the Caribbean are spared from severe weather as they reckon with the coronavirus. This pandemic, Excellencies, like climate change, affects all of us. Like the rising seas, stronger storms, and changing weather patterns, this new crisis and the looming financial burden of overcoming it makes the division between the developed and developing worlds feel starker than ever. And even with much of the world at a standstill, our changing climate doesn't rest for any disease, meaning that already vulnerable communities across the Pacific, Africa, and the Caribbean are left contending with some of the most devastating consequences of both crises at once. Your Excellencies, in Fiji, Tropical Cyclone Harold arrived on the heels of our first COVID-19 case. We climate-proofed our public health response to prevent the storm's chaos from worsening the spread of the virus. And our containment strategy has since proved decisive. But 43 days removed from our last confirmed case, it's clear the pandemic's economic fallout is far more destructive than any storm and far beyond our own capabilities to constrain. With up to 40% of our GDP dependent on tourism, our full recovery will be measured not in months, but in years. Global financing frameworks were already ill-suited to confront the climate emergency, and COVID-19 has further exposed their inability to rapidly and sustainably respond to the complex realities across our regions. Last week, Your Excellencies, at a special summit convened by the Prime Ministers of Canada and Jamaica, I call for radical financing solutions to respond to the radical economic crisis at our doorsteps, specifically to ensure the full implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Just 1/3 of the way in our journey towards the 2030 agenda, we've arrived at a defining crossroads. If the world stands by and watches this crisis drive vulnerable economies into the ground, the SDGs will be all but impossible to achieve. Socio-economic support systems will be crippled, and existing inequalities will deepen. The 10 years separating us from 2030 was meant to be a period of great unification, uplifting the lives of billions. But if the international community mishandles its response to COVID-19, we risk this being a lost decade, one of irreparable consequence for our planet and humankind. Without urgent intervention to keep the developing world on course towards SDGs through this crisis, human progress will wear the scars of this pandemic for generations. It is estimated that Pacific small island developing states require additional economic stimulus packages of at least 15% of the value of our GDPs just to maintain our social and economic orders. With our traditional revenue sources gutted, the support of our development partners, including within the European Union and multilateral development banks, is critical. Amidst this pandemic, African, Caribbean, and Pacific Island states must be empowered to continue investing in all of our SDGs. And the highly developed nations of the world must not lose sight of the vision that first inspired the 2030 Agenda. In the coming months, COVID-19 will trigger financial decisions that have the potential to reshape the world as we know it. The developing world deserves a seat at the table, and we demand to be consulted about considerations that will determine our fate. We must stand in solidarity with one another, and the EU must not settle for unilateral outcomes that more closely resemble a return to colonial inequities than the inclusive future we sought to achieve. Please consult, don't prescribe. This will be a story of two recoveries, one economic and one health. Each fundamentally depends on the other, and neither can be achieved without coordinated global action. We vulnerable nations must speak loudly with one voice to ensure that sustainable progress isn't the ultimate casualty to COVID-19. I thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and really once again, truly appreciate you finding and taking time this very late hour at night to join and to make your contribution and to continue to offer that solidarity with your brothers and sisters across the African, Caribbean, and Pacific. Thank you very, very much. I would like now to give the floor to His Excellency Andrew Holness, our brother from Jamaica, for him to deliver his remarks. Welcome, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My brother, and the last time I saw you in person, you taught me Jambo. And it is good to see you, even if it is virtually. Secretary General, colleagues, when we last met in Nairobi last year, we resolved to deepen and strengthen our solidarity as a group of developing states. Little did we know that only a few weeks later, the novel coronavirus would be declared a global health emergency. And then later, a pandemic, severely eroding our resilience and even reversing the hard-earned gains of sustainable development. CARIFORUM states have experienced devastating impacts in multiple areas, including health, education, culture, trade, and finance. The mainstay of most of our economies, agriculture and tourism, were hardest hit by a staggering fallout in revenue and employment. These experiences are certainly echoed across ACP states. This global crisis is a resounding call to action for nothing less than a comprehensive revision of the system of global economic governance that will promote sustainable development, even in the face of a pandemic. This includes redefining development indices, ameliorating inequalities, and addressing economic imbalance. Admittedly, the pandemic has summoned increased coordinated responses from the international community. These include the UN Secretary General's launch of the COVID-19 Global Humanitarian Response Plan, requiring US $2 billion from member states to boost the global response. In Nairobi, we committed to strengthening multilateralism for development. Let us therefore engage our institutions to consider innovative solutions. The flaws in the current international financial and economic system must be remedied. The OACPS must mount a strong advocacy campaign for access to emergency liquidity support of developing countries with vulnerable economies. This will require the international financial system to facilitate the channeling of public and private credit flows into productive development capital. Together, we must address global inequality, unsustainable debt, and socio-economic disparities. In this regard, the intra-ACP collaboration, including South-South cooperation, can become an effective tool in building stronger social systems and infrastructures. Regional cooperation can also promote the reorientation of our societies to adjust to the new normal that we must now embrace. Institutions such as the Caribbean Public Health Agency have played a sterling role in instituting health protocols that have helped to minimize the spread of the coronavirus and its effects on Caribbean societies. Collaboration with regional health agencies across the OACPS and the exchange of information, technical expertise, and best practices are essential. Bilateral partnerships among multilateral institutions and private sector participation are critical in the battle and recovery from COVID-19. In addition to financial resources, they can offer well-needed investment, especially in the areas of research and innovation. Caribbean countries noted with great concern the announcement that the EU had blacklisted some of our countries for assessed deficiencies in our anti-money laundering system. Our organization must lobby collectively to curtail the unilateral listing of our countries, which imposes further economic and financial hardships and negates efforts to build the economic resilience needed for development. Instead, we would wish to see our EU partners leverage their influence in major multilateral fora to advocate on behalf of developing countries, to have the crippling structural imbalances in the international economic system swiftly addressed, and give further support to those countries that are demonstrably making efforts to comply and implement global standards. The pandemic has no doubt threatened lives and livelihoods. However, it has also provided us with an opportunity to reconfigure our societies to work smarter and safer by further integrating technology and innovation in our productive activities. As a forward-looking organization, let us commit to using the opportunity the crisis presents to build back better. Although the global disparities are increasing, we in the CARIFORUM group believe that new institutional arrangements can address the current deficiencies so that we all emerge renewed in the face of this global crisis. Let us pursue this new architecture. Mr. Chairman, colleagues and friends, I thank you for the opportunity to share my views.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We appreciate, and once again, thank you for being up at this very early hour in order to participate with us and to make your contribution. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to one of our elder statesmen of the African continent, His Excellency Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo. Monsieur le Président, you have the floor.
Mesdames et Messieurs, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement des pays membres des ACP, Monsieur le secrétaire général des ACP, Monsieur le directeur général de l'OMS, je voudrais remercier le président Uhuru Kenyatta de m'avoir associé à cet important sommet qui pose, entre autres thématiques, la question de la solidarité internationale dans le renforcement des ripostes nationales et globales à la pandémie de COVID-19. Je voudrais aussi saluer le secrétaire général des ACP, M. Georges Chikoti, nouvellement installé dans ses fonctions. Je lui souhaite plein succès dans son activité. Je voudrais encore une fois exprimer le soutien de mon pays au directeur général de l'OMS pour le travail important qu'il développe à la tête de cette organisation, notamment en ces moments très difficiles du développement de la pandémie de COVID-19. Je me souviens encore du soutien qu'il a apporté à l'Afrique lors de sa présence ici à Brazzaville, à l'occasion de la réunion des ministres africains de la santé. Je lui souhaite donc à lui aussi le succès dans son travail. La pandémie de COVID-19 a mis l'économie mondiale à l'arrêt et brisé la dynamique de développement dans la plupart des États, surtout en Afrique et dans les États des Caraïbes et du Pacifique. Ainsi, dans le domaine de la santé, on pourrait relever les faiblesses des infrastructures sanitaires dans les pays ACP. J'invite donc à un effort collectif de mise en place de grandes structures modernes, dûment équipées et en mesure de desservir les pays par pôles régionaux. Aucun pays ne pourra tout seul disposer de toutes les infrastructures nécessaires, d'où l'intérêt de s'appuyer sur des projets intégrateurs, financés par exemple en partenariat public-privé dans différents secteurs comme ceux de l'énergie, des transports ou de l'industrie. Pour l'Afrique, l'appel pressant exige une réponse globale solidaire et coordonnée. Une telle vision requiert la solidarité et le soutien des partenaires techniques et financiers. C'est pourquoi je salue les conclusions du G20 proposant une suspension du paiement du service de la dette publique bilatérale des pays de l'Association internationale du développement. À ce titre, j'en appelle à l'élargissement des mesures prises par le G20 à l'ensemble des pays.
This one we can have because they are in charge. We are not hosting this meeting,
Yes,
so
exactly.
we have no...
So they've allowed us back on, right? The microphone is off, right?
Y a-t-il un problème? Il en est de même des facilités de financement d'urgence du Fonds monétaire international dont le bénéfice devrait être exempté devant la gravité de la crise sanitaire au coronavirus, de la logique inadmissible des contraintes des seuls équilibres macroéconomiques et des réponses parfois très sélectives des institutions financières internationales et des bailleurs de fonds. Dans cette optique, il s'y est dénoncé la question des changements climatiques qui participent également de cette même logique et intègre l'ensemble des débats actuels et en perspective. Face à la pandémie de COVID-19, le leadership des grandes puissances se reconnaîtra donc au travers du renforcement du multilatéralisme, seul gage de la relance et de la redynamisation du système international aujourd'hui gravement mis à mal. Je voudrais m'associer à l'indignation exprimée par mon frère et ami, le président Ramaphosa, président en exercice de l'Union africaine, face à l'assassinat de George Floyd. Cette image qui a circulé dans le monde est ni plus ni moins que le prolongement du drame vécu par des millions de femmes et d'hommes arrachés à l'Afrique. Ces images, nous les avons vues il n'y a pas longtemps en Afrique australe et plus particulièrement en Afrique du Sud. Je pense que les peuples du monde condamneront ces actes et appelleront à plus de fraternité et d'humanisme. En conclusion, avec toutes ces crises économiques, financières, sanitaires, climatiques, rien ne devrait plus être comme avant dans les modes de production et de consommation. Bref, dans les relations entre les États et les peuples. Toutes ces crises mettent en tout cas en évidence la nécessité d'une grande solidarité dans la gouvernance mondiale. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your wise counsel. At this particular moment, I would want to make a small request, Your Excellencies, if it is acceptable, because our second segment is due to start at 3 p.m. So I was going to suggest if we could make a slight change in the program, because it's only 5 minutes away, where we would then have His Excellency President Imbalo, His Excellency President Kagame, His Excellency President Lungu, His Excellency President Faure of Seychelles. They would then make a response on all our behalves to the sentiments in the second segment. I don't know whether that is acceptable, because we are sort of we've overshot time. Is that acceptable? President Kagame?
I do not understand what the request is exactly.
The request is that we had a second segment where we have our development partners joining us, which starts at 3 p.m. in the next 5 minutes. So I was suggesting that if we can change the program a little bit and then have the President of Guinea-Bissau, the President of Seychelles, the President of Zambia, and yourself, President, giving the response to the comments or the statements that will be made by our international partners. I don't know whether that is convenient.
Meaning
yes,
after?
After, so that you can round up on all our behalves and give the response to the statement of our development partners.
Now, my time, personally, my time won't allow me to do that. But I mean, I would suggest that the remaining heads of state to speak. In that case, if we could agree who will represent us in giving the response, that would be fine. But personally, I may not be able to make it.
I don't know, President Imbalo, will that be okay with you?
Eu penso que sim, eu penso que tínhamos que continuar. I think it's important.
Yes, I think it's possible. We can continue.
Thank you. President Faure, Seychelles.
Yeah, President, I'm prepared to respond. It's not a problem.
Thank you very much. President Lungu. You're not coming through, President Lungu? There's a problem. President, you're not coming through.
Hello?
Yeah, now we get you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was saying we needed to talk first, express our concerns so that our cooperating partners can address them. But if we're going to speak after, then we can as well not speak.
Well, then in that case, I think I would then give, since the other two have agreed, I think I can then give the floor to yourself, President, and then President Kagame, and then our two friends then will give the response to the statement by the development partners. Is that okay?
Yes. That's okay, Mr. President. I'll try to be very quick.
There you go. My brother, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellency, my dear brother, President Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, who is also President in office of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States and chair of this very important occasion. Your Excellencies, let me start by commending His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, for convening this summit, which is being held under the theme, Transcending the COVID-19 Pandemic, Building Resilience through Global Solidarity. I'm indeed very, very grateful for this opportunity to contribute to this topic of so much significance to all of us. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused massive disruption to lives worldwide. Like other OACPS member states, Zambia has not been spared, recording 1,062 cases, and as of today, 9 deaths have been reported. The transmission of this virus is both local and from outside, with a high risk of cross-border transmission, especially that Zambia is a landlocked country bordering with 8 countries. Your Excellencies, Zambia's COVID response involves implementing strategic interventions in line with the guidance from the World Health Organization and the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention to mitigate the disease. At regional level, Zambia has been adhering to the relevant Southern African Development Community SADC protocols aligned to international guidelines. Although the country continues to record new cases of COVID-19, my government remains committed to ensuring that our people are safe, protected, and continue to be productive. In this regard, people have been encouraged to begin to participate in various economic activities while they exercise and practice infection prevention and control measures in line with public health guidance and embracing what we are now calling globally the new normal. Your Excellencies, COVID-19 pandemic may be with us for a long time to come. Therefore, it is cardinal to leverage resources and expertise at national, regional, continental, and global levels. Together, let us fight for our existence using all necessary knowledge, technologies, and capabilities. We need to invest in strong healthcare systems and make resources available in order to accelerate development, invention, and innovation through various initiatives, including research and development, especially in medical products, such as diagnostics, medicines, and vaccines. Your Excellencies, I'm indeed gratified that this organization provides us with a platform on which our common aspirations can be advanced and challenges addressed. And I'm confident that with concerned effort and unity of purpose, together we can conquer this pandemic, this epidemic on a global scale. True to today's theme, let us enhance our collective efforts to transcend the COVID-19 pandemic by building resilience through global solidarity. Therefore, going forward, I wish to propose the following and conclude. 1, let us solicit for debt relief or cancellation for all OACPS member states. And measures on the fight against COVID-19. 3, let's enhance research and local development of vaccination and cure of COVID-19. 4, let's adequately mobilize resources from local and international community. And 5, let us direct our respective ambassadors and representatives in Brussels to lobby for enhanced support from the European Union. Mr. President, colleagues, I thank you.
Your Excellency President Kagame.
Presidente Uhuru, tendo minha agenda, eu queria, se não se importasse, eu entrevista agora.
I would like to take the floor now as well.
Depois, Presidente Uhuru, eu gostaria de... É possível.
Of course, that is possible.
President, I would really request that we go with what we had previously agreed in order so that we can, as you can see, our colleagues across have already joined us. So I was going to really beg your indulgence, and we go as we had just previously agreed.
Okay.
President Kagame, you have the floor.
Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, heads of state and government, Secretary General, I wish to start by thanking you, President, for convening this extraordinary summit. I thank Dr. Tedros for his presentation, and we fully support the World Health Organization and its leadership in spearheading this global fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. I also applaud the rich set of ideas and proposals which Your Excellencies have put forward today. It is a demonstration of the relevance of this newly transformed organization. It is also an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of cooperation among our three regions. The coronavirus pandemic has already taken a severe toll in lives and lost economic activity. It is still impossible to say how long the disruption and hardships will last. And the response capacity of many members of organizations need reinforcement. In this context, it is important for the African, Caribbean, Pacific states to cooperate closely on measures to end the pandemic and enhance economic resilience. In particular, coordination will be needed to ensure equitable access to treatments, vaccines, and medical supplies. The African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has already played a key role in building testing capacity around our continent. As the African Union has done, we may also work to harmonize and amplify our voices on the continued need for our countries to have adequate physical space to respond effectively. The continued sanctions on two members of our organization, Sudan and Zimbabwe, should be lifted in order to support their ability to respond to the health crisis in help of their populations. The ACP is an arrangement that has stood the test of time for over 40 years. Over that period, much has changed for the better in terms of social and economic development. The ongoing negotiations to define the next phase of the relationship between the ACP states and the European Union reflect these new realities, and this is very significant. COVID-19 should not cause additional delays in finalizing the post-Cotonou agreement. At the same time, we should seize this opportunity to ensure that the prevention and recovery measures under discussion here are fully integrated into the final agreement. Europe will remain an important partner for our regions, just as we are important partners for Europe. The effects of COVID-19 will persist long after the virus has been defeated, and the road to recovery will be long. Increased cooperation and mutual interdependence will be the hallmark of effective international response. I thank you for your kind attention, heads of state and government. Thank you, President Kenyatta, for inviting us to participate in this.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and I think we will move straight into our second segment, and I take this opportunity to welcome to our virtual summit all our international development partners And we want to thank you for taking time out of your own busy schedules to attend this extraordinary summit with us. And I believe that this attests to the importance that you attach to global solidarity, especially in taking corrective action in addressing this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm confident that our interaction today will meet our collective aspirations in addressing the challenges caused by COVID-19 and providing the support needed to overcome them. We ourselves, as the Organization of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific States, met in Nairobi last year, and we came out with a Nairobi Nguvu ya Pamoja Declaration. And in this, we basically underscored the need to adjust to new forms of cooperation, diversification of partnerships through South-South, North-South, triangular cooperation to help us address emerging challenges. However, this COVID-19 pandemic has precipitated a major global health and social economic crisis with disruption in services as well as demand on top of the disruption of supply chains. At our individual national levels, COVID-19 has led to a shrinking of fiscal space, while at the international level, the pandemic has weakened the pipeline of resources dedicated to development programs, because countries that traditionally provide overseas development assistance are also suffering from the effects of the pandemic. The debt of many of our member states continue to rise. 44% of low-income and least developed countries are in debt distress or are assessed as being at high risk of external debt distress. COVID-19 and related global economic shocks will only exacerbate the problem. Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific state members will require between 50 to 60 billion US dollars this year just to meet their international debt obligations alone. These numbers truly reflect a deeply troubling situation for ACP member countries. Ladies and gentlemen, a global unforeseen crisis of this magnitude can only be resolved with global solidarity, and we need to urgently put in place a COVID-19 continuity and financing mechanism. And let me, at this stage, propose a few ideas that hopefully could be discussed during the session. Firstly, identify strategies to address the unsustainable debt situation in OACPS countries, optimize South-South, North-South, and triangular cooperation in addressing challenges facing our member states. The next is to increase access to concessional financing, as we have said in various forums and also endorsed today, to OACPS member states, and to ensure that lending practices are fully in line with sustainable and responsible financing practices. And lastly, to broaden sources of financing through public-private partnerships and innovating financing approaches so that we can really develop a fair and effective and timely way of supporting our member states during this particular crisis. I really, truly thank all of you for participating, and I look forward to an interactive and fruitful deliberations on this subject. And at this stage, I would like to welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, to make his remarks. Secretary General, you have the floor.
Your Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing enormous suffering and economic hardship around the world. And we need a much stronger response of unity and solidarity if we are to get through this pandemic together and build a safer and more stable future. The economic and social impact of the pandemic is devastating economies. Since the beginning, we have called for an economic stimulus package equivalent to a double-digit percentage, more than 10% of the global economy. This must prioritize putting cash in the hands of those most badly affected and increasing social protection for the vulnerable, both in the developed and in the developing world. Looming crisis could contribute to the deepest global depression since the 30s. I welcome the debt relief initiatives by the G20, but they are not enough. Last week, the United Nations, together with the governments of Jamaica and Canada, convened world leaders around financing a sustainable recovery, and I was encouraged by the response. Many governments and several international organizations will all join us in 6 working groups focused on 6 areas for immediate action. First, global liquidity. Many countries are seeing their fiscal space shrink so that they lack the funds for essential measures and supplies to fight the pandemic. We need to use all tools to enhance liquidity, including considering a new issuance of special drawing rights for the IMF. Second, sovereign debt. The G20 debt moratorium only covers the least developed countries. Debt relief must be extended to all developing and middle-income countries that request forbearance because they have no access to financial markets. Third, any comprehensive solution on debt must include dialogue with private creditors. We need creative ways to encourage them to join debt relief efforts. Fourth, external finance. Aligning incentives in global financial systems with the Sustainable Development Goals will boost confidence and relaunch investment in sustainable development. Fifth, illicit financial flows. We must plug the leaks that deny developing countries hundreds of billions of dollars each year. And sixth, we must recover better. COVID-19 is exposing the fragility of our world. It has laid bare deep injustices and inequalities based on income, gender, race, and more. Returning to the system that creating this fragility is out of the question. All our efforts must go towards building more equal, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economies and societies based on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. This is essential not only to beat COVID-19, but to tackle the other existential crises we face, including the climate emergency. Small island development states face particular challenges. Many are heavily indebted, on the front lines of the climate crisis, and rely heavily on tourism and remittances, sectors that are among the hardest hit. African countries' rapid and effective response to the crisis holds lessons for other countries and regions. However, much still lies in the balance. Unless we act now, economic recession could push millions of people across the continent into extreme poverty or even hunger. This cannot be allowed to happen. We are pushing hard for international action to support African countries, strengthen health systems, maintain food supplies, project jobs, and keep households and businesses afloat. Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic poses a serious threat to our well-being and our future. Global and unifying solutions are lagging behind, and one such solution would be a vaccine for COVID-19. I repeat my call for this to be made available quickly, affordably, and equally. It must be seen as a global public good, as the people's vaccine. We must all have the means of ending the pandemic if we are to live in safety together. And I thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your strong support and for that intervention. We really appreciate everything that you're doing and the articulation that you are making, especially on the behalf of the most vulnerable states. Thank you very much, Secretary General. I'd like now to give the floor to the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel, for him to make his remarks.
Thank you. Dear heads of state and government, dear friends, I'd like to thank President Kenyatta and the Secretary General of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, Mr. Chikoti, for this initiative. It brings us together at a pivotal time in our history. We all know the damage COVID-19 is inflicting on our populations and our economies. We see it in those who have lost loved ones and those who wonder how to put bread on the table for their families. For them, this is a moment of pain, fear, and uncertainty. But we must never be dragged down by pessimism or fatalism. This global outbreak reminds us how connected we are, that it can be a time to reinvest in what connects us: multilateralism, international cooperation, and collective action. It reminds us of our shared destinies. The African, Caribbean, and Pacific states are invested in this cooperation. Today's meeting is proof of that. There is no clearer option for the European Union than to be by their side, to be, dear friends, by your side. Europe has a historic partnership with the ACP countries. We share a rich and diverse landscape of political, commercial, and cultural exchanges, and a shared resolve to make sustainable development a reality for all. The Cotonou Agreement, which connects us, is the only legally binding agreement that the EU and its member states have ever concluded with so many countries. The bonds we share give us a special responsibility. The EU is taking bold action to overcome coronavirus at home, but we will not turn our backs on our global responsibilities towards Africa in particular. The partnership between the EU and African, Caribbean, and Pacific states is a prime example of the vibrant multilateralism we want to promote. Our countries represent over half of the seats in the United Nations. When we band together, we can be the catalyst for change in so many ways. Take climate change. In 2015, we joined forces for the Paris Agreement, and we made a difference. Today, we are facing another global threat in COVID-19. And once again, multilateralism will be our best line of defense. Solidarity must underpin this joint response, not a solidarity based on misplaced clear conscience, not a solidarity of words, but a solidarity of action, tangible and real, both during the crisis and tomorrow, as we forge a more caring society. Dear friends, first, we need to defeat the virus. So long as the virus is somewhere, we must act as if it's everywhere, from Brussels to Vanuatu, from Addis Abeba to Port-au-Prince. We, the European Union, with our member states and financial institutions, are redirecting 25 billion euros of funding to support our partners. But we need to go further, and I have a personal commitment to that relief. We welcome the first steps taken in the G20. These will give the most vulnerable countries breathing space and margin for maneuver. But we can do more by involving major creditors in debt relief efforts. Global ambitions come with global responsibilities, and I will continue to advocate tirelessly for such action in the G7, G20, and with all the other international partners. Next, we need to find ways to put the pandemic behind us. Vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics are the only way to relegate the virus to the history books. On this sensitive issue, we stand with you. The EU recently wrapped up a successful pledging conference together with our international partners. 9.5 billion euros were raised to develop and distribute health solutions on a large scale at an affordable price. Our vision is a vaccine that's accessible everywhere for everyone, and I join the call for the people's vaccine. Any future vaccine should be treated as a global common good. Finally, after COVID-19, we must rebuild. Recreating the post-COVID world will be an immense task, and I feel a special responsibility to the young generation, the millions of young people who will live the results of our actions today. Let's make sure they will benefit from our successes. As Nobel laureate and former president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf said, future generations will judge us not by what we say, but by what we do. The world after coronavirus must not be a carbon copy of the one before. That's neither possible nor desirable. We must show greater solidarity and more respect for the planet and use digital technologies responsibly for the good of humankind. It's now up to us, the international community. Let's make sure the scope of our action matches the scope of this pandemic. Asante Sana, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for staying.
Jambo ndugu Rais wa Kenya. Senhor Presidente em exercício de chefe de Estado da CP, Secretário-Geral da Organização da ACP, distintos participantes. Em primeiro lugar, quero saudar os meus pares, membros da Organização de Estados da África, Caraíbas e Pacífico, aqui presentes. Dirigir uma saudação especial ao Ndugu Kenyatta, presidente em exercício de Conferência de Chefes de Estado da ACP, que nos reuniu hoje através de uma plataforma virtual para a realização desta primeira sessão extraordinária. A Guiné-Bissau intervém nesse fórum na qualidade de coordenador do grupo de Estados da ACP da África Ocidental. E nesta qualidade, permita-me levar o vosso conhecimento aquilo que os Estados da nossa região ACP têm feito no combate à pandemia do Covid-19. Os Estados da África Ocidental, cientes da gravidade da ameaça do Covid-19 e seguindo a recomendação da OMS e das instituições sanitárias regionais, tomaram medidas rápidas e de grande coragem política para o seu combate, mobilizando as especialidades e capacidades nacionais e subregionais, informando, sensibilizando as populações para a contribuição cívica e cidadão no respeito das recomendações de combate à pandemia. A nível da cooperação subregional, destaca-se a realização de 23 de abril de uma cimeira de chefes de Estado da CEDEAO com o objetivo de coordenar e reforçar a luta contra a doença de Covid-19. Os chefes de Estado mostraram-se preocupados com os impactos sanitários, social, econômico, financeiro e de segurança humana profundamente negativos do Covid-19. Todos os Estados membros da CEDEAO realçando a séria ameaça que a pandemia era para o processo de desenvolvimento econômico e social, para o programa regional, para a paz e segurança. Por isso, os Estados da CEDEAO definiram uma estratégia de combate à Covid-19 que comporta 2 níveis de ação. Uma ao nível intrarregional, que apresenta a mobilização de recursos disponíveis para o apoio à ação da Organização Oeste-Africana de Saúde e coordenação com a Comissão da Saúde. Outra ao nível continental, centrada no apoio da estratégia conjunta da África face à pandemia e à Covid-19 da União Africana. Para mais Estados membros da CEDEAO, comprometeram-se em relançar e alocar menos 15% do orçamento anual para os esforços do Sistema de Saúde Nacional. Importa destacar as ações da CEDEAO e problemática de estabilização e recuperação econômica nesse sentido. Revela-se, Senhor Presidente, o importante apoio da comunidade. E antes de mais, quero terminar para saudar aos participantes e em particular ao meu amigo Ndugu Uhuru Kenyatta, aos nossos parceiros internacionais. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, President Mbalo. We appreciate those comments and the statements you have just made. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to move on to a video message from President Emmanuel Macron of France.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs les Présidents et Premiers ministres, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Mesdames, Messieurs, la crise du Covid-19 nous demande un effort de solidarité sans précédent, un effort massif, immédiat, simultané sur l'ensemble des continents. Au moment où nous constatons une amélioration de la situation sanitaire en Europe, nous commettrions une faute de ne pas nous préoccuper des autres espaces où la pandémie continue malheureusement de progresser. C'est pourquoi je veux aujourd'hui remercier le président Uhuru Kenyatta, mon ami, d'avoir pris cette initiative de nous réunir aujourd'hui dans ce format si précieux qui rassemble l'Afrique, les Caraïbes, le Pacifique et l'Europe. Vous connaissez l'attachement profond et historique que la France entretient avec ce qu'on appelle l'espace ACP. Au moment où nous discutons du renouvellement de ce pacte, permettez-moi de rappeler combien ces accords ont construit entre nous un espace de solidarité mais aussi de valeurs communes. Et à ce titre, je veux remercier le président Charles Michel, la présidente de la Commission européenne Ursula von der Leyen pour l'énergie, la détermination qu'ils déploient pour finaliser les discussions qui doivent mener, je le souhaite, au renouvellement de ces accords. La crise du Covid doit donc nous conduire à accélérer la marche vers l'objectif commun que nous avons défini dans les accords qui nous lient. Un cadre de croissance partagé, fondé sur la lutte contre les inégalités et la lutte contre le changement climatique. Et je n'oublie pas que c'est avec l'appui en bloc du groupe des pays ACP que nous étions parvenus à l'adoption de l'accord de Paris lors de la COP21. Aujourd'hui, grâce à l'initiative du président Kenyatta de donner une nouvelle ambition à cet espace, de le mettre en avant-garde de la lutte contre la pandémie du Covid-19, nous poursuivons une initiative commencée il y a plusieurs semaines avec plus d'une quinzaine de chefs d'État africains, européens, d'une initiative forte pour l'Afrique que nous venons compléter, enrichir. Et au fond, la France continuera de porter, dans ce cadre, c'est le principal message que je voulais aujourd'hui partager avec vous, 4 priorités. La première, c'est évidemment la réponse sanitaire à la crise. Les outils de la réponse à la pandémie doivent être disponibles pour tous, sans obstacle de ressources, sans écart de calendrier, sans distinction de géographie. Personne ne comprendrait qu'on puisse attendre pour disposer de tests, de traitements le jour où ils sont stabilisés, et encore moins d'un vaccin. C'est l'objectif que nous avons consacré lors de l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé qui s'est tenue le 18 mai dernier et par l'adoption d'une résolution portée par l'Union européenne. C'est aussi le sens de l'initiative ACT-A qui a posé les bases d'une réponse inédite qui couvre toutes les dimensions de la crise. Les tests, les traitements, le vaccin, mais aussi le soutien au système de santé. Il ne faut jamais oublier ce dernier point sans lequel la possibilité même d'accéder aux populations, de les soigner est impossible. Nous nous sommes collectivement mobilisés. La présidente von der Leyen a tenu une conférence de financement qui a permis de lever 7,5 milliards d'euros grâce à un alignement inédit entre les acteurs publics et privés de la santé mondiale. Il faut encore l'amplifier, aller plus loin, tout comme il faut aussi accélérer le soutien que le Fonds mondial doit apporter au système de santé des pays les plus fragiles. Les ressources sont là, nous en sommes assurés. Il faut maintenant les efforts de gouvernance qui ont été promis et il faut mettre en œuvre ce que nous avons décidé. La deuxième priorité, c'est l'appui aux pays les plus fragiles face à la pandémie. Je pense en particulier à l'Afrique, où la réponse au Covid s'est organisée de manière remarquable. Je salue à ce titre le leadership pris par la présidence de l'Union africaine, le président Ramaphosa, le président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Moussa Faki, et le travail remarquable mené par les 5 envoyés spéciaux nommés pour coordonner une réponse continentale. Aujourd'hui, le choc est économique, c'est une certitude. Nous espérons tous qu'il ne sera pas aussi sanitaire en plus et au-delà de ce que nous mesurons aujourd'hui. Pour y faire face, nous avons pris, avec, comme je le disais un instant, 17 de mes homologues africains et européens, l'initiative d'une réponse en 4 volets, sanitaire, économique, scientifique, humanitaire. D'ores et déjà, le G20 a entériné un moratoire sur le service de la dette qui bénéficie à l'ensemble des pays en situation de fragilité. Comme je l'ai rappelé à l'ensemble de mes interlocuteurs au cours des dernières semaines, y compris le président Trump et le président Xi Jinping, nous devons être prêts à aller au-delà, à aller jusqu'à l'annulation de dettes. C'est mon souhait dans certains cas. Mais ce moratoire comme cette annulation doivent couvrir l'ensemble des dettes existantes, l'ensemble des pays. Et nous devons aussi aller plus loin pour organiser une réponse qui est en quelque sorte la réponse monétaire pour les économies les plus fragiles des pays en voie de développement comme des pays émergents. Et la réponse monétaire, elle passe par le Fonds monétaire international. Ce que nous avons fait, nous Européens, anglo-saxons, asiatiques, avec des banques centrales fortes, des monnaies stables, c'est-à-dire des mécanismes qui ont permis d'absorber une large partie du début de ce choc. Nous devons permettre aux économies en voie de développement et aux économies émergentes de le faire grâce au FMI. C'est pourquoi je suis favorable à la réallocation des droits de tirage spéciaux existantes et à une augmentation de capital. La troisième priorité que je souhaite ici défendre, c'est de sauver le secteur privé des pays les plus touchés par le choc économique. Elle est clairement liée à ce que je viens de dire. Nous l'avons fait en Europe grâce à des outils de politique économique qui n'existent pas en Afrique. Et si nous n'agissons pas aujourd'hui, en Afrique en particulier, ce sont des dizaines de milliers de petites et moyennes entreprises qui vont être emportées par la crise. Face à un tel défi, le partenariat UE-ACP doit prendre tout son sens. Et je souhaite que l'Union européenne prenne l'initiative de rassembler une vaste coalition pour venir en aide au secteur privé de la zone ACP, porter à cette fin des garanties et des liquidités. La France y contribuera au travers de l'Agence française de développement pour sauver des emplois qui bénéficient avant tout aux femmes, à la jeunesse. Ce doit être la priorité de nos banques publiques de développement dans les semaines et mois à venir. Et nous devons, dans ce cadre, renforcer les initiatives qui ont déjà été prises. Je pense à l'initiative AFAWA, entre autres, qui est un élément de la réponse à cette urgence. La quatrième priorité, c'est le climat et la biodiversité. L'espace ACP, par sa géographie, les épreuves auxquelles il a été confronté, en résument tous les défis. Et la conscience du lien intrinsèque entre les enjeux sanitaires et environnementaux est présente depuis longtemps dans les îles du Pacifique comme des Caraïbes. C'est à nous de mieux les écouter, de leur faire une place centrale dans la nouvelle gouvernance mondiale que dessine la crise du Covid-19. Ce sera l'objet du One Planet Summit que la France accueillera à Marseille en janvier prochain avec l'Union internationale pour la conservation de la nature. Ce rendez-vous nous rassemblera autour de projets qui doivent marquer un changement de cap, un changement d'échelle profond. Je pense au projet de la Grande Muraille Verte du Sahara, qui pourrait être l'incarnation d'une ambition euro-africaine et illustrer une renaissance économique et écologique du Sahel et de l'Afrique. Il y aura à cette occasion plusieurs initiatives que nous devons prendre, qu'elles touchent l'Afrique, les Caraïbes, le Pacifique. Chacune de ces zones concentre ses vulnérabilités et, je le sais, la conviction très profonde que le défi du climat et de la biodiversité doit être relevé ensemble. C'est ce que nous avions porté avec le Premier ministre de la Jamaïque il y a quelques mois, ensemble lors de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, pour lever des financements. C'est ce que nous continuerons avec plusieurs chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la région Caraïbe, Pacifique ou africaine à porter ensemble. Voilà les 4 priorités que je voulais partager avec vous. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous avoir permis de démontrer aujourd'hui que l'espace ACP est avant tout une géographie de valeurs, de solidarité. La France y est présente. La France existe par sa chair, sa géographie, son histoire, dans l'ensemble de ses continents et ses espaces. Elle en partage le destin, les valeurs, les volontés. À vos côtés, la France continuera d'y jouer tout son rôle. Merci.
We thank President Macron for that message and strong support, and we will continue to partner together as we move on. I'd like now to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Norway, our good friend, Mrs. Erna Solberg. You have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. Meetings like this have become so important because the only way to address this crisis is through dialogue, cooperation, solidarity, and multilateral solutions. We are in this together, and we must get through this together. This is why Norway's response to the pandemic has been focused on developing vaccines and ensuring that they will be equitably and fairly distributed. We have invested heavily both in CEPI and Gavi, and we are supporting the UN and the World Health Organization in their efforts to address both the immediate and the long-term consequences. And we are working with our partners around the world to align our efforts with your priorities. We recognize that for many, the economic and social consequences of COVID-19
usually there is an agenda of this meeting.
Crisis has exposed some fundamental weaknesses in our global system. The fact that the most vulnerable in our societies are hit the hardest should be given urgency to our efforts to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Because the Sustainable Development Goals are in fact our roadmap to recovery from this crisis. In addition to the health crisis, the most pressing issue to mitigate is the immediate economic consequences. The World Bank estimates that the pandemic will push 60 million people into extreme poverty in 2020 and cause the global poverty rate to rise for the first time in more than 20 years. And we risk a doubling of people facing crisis levels of hunger. This must be a wake-up call for us to invest in and secure agriculture, food production, and jobs now to prevent more people from falling into hunger and poverty. As a first step, Norway took the initiative to establish a UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. The aim is to help those most vulnerable to the economic hardships as a consequence of the pandemic. And I hear your clear statements on the issues of debt and access to concessional financing. Norway supports the IMF, the World Bank's debt moratorium initiative, and the Paris Club G20 decision to offer a deferment of payment through 2020. This will increase low-income countries' capability to address the pandemic. At the same time, we must build resilience in our communities. Investing in health and education and ensuring gender equality is our best strategy. Around 1.2 billion children are now affected by school closures, but learning should never stop. Norway is the second largest contributor to the Education Cannot Wait, which supports access to education in crisis and emergencies. In our efforts, both health and education, we have a particular focus on girls and on women. We know that they are adversely affected in this crisis. In other words, the effects of this pandemic and economies, poverty, hunger, education, and gender equality shows us why it's now time to accelerate progress on the SDGs. And I believe we must start with the SDG number 17, partnerships for the goals. Norway is very proud to be a long-standing partner of the African Union. Over the last 20 years, our partnership with African countries have broadened. Political dialogue, private sector engagement, and development and multilateral cooperation are now the backbone of our relationships. Norway will strengthen partnerships with countries in the Pacific and the Caribbean to promote our common interests, whether it is access to finance, climate change, natural disasters, fisheries, or the health of the oceans. And I join all of you in the hoping for a milder hurricane season. It's something we really need in these times of difficulties. So, Excellencies, Norway was a consistent partner long before the pandemic hit, and I can assure you that we will remain a close partner through this crisis and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that solidarity. We look forward to our continued working together. Thank you very much. I'd like now to give the floor to another great friend of all our regions, our good friend, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Justin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking you, President Kenyatta, and OACPS Secretary General Chikoti for bringing us together today. Uhuru, my friend, as usual, your leadership is significant. And George, it's good to see you. I know you spent many years in Canada, so it's always nice to have a friend as we have there. You know, these video meetings have been more and more important, as Erna pointed out, over these past weeks, is keeping us together and having us work together. But I want to give a specific shout out to so many friends who continue to stay on and engage throughout. Antonio, Nia, Edgar, Cyril, Danny, Michelle, you're sticking around for all these conversations and listening, and that's really at the center of the dialogue we need. You know, Congo, good to see you as well. It's really important that we continue to actually have conversations, not just for dialogue's sake, but on how we're going to act forward together. A little reminder, those of you who need French translation, this Zoom has the French translation, so I'm about to be very Canadian, so brace yourselves. On sait tous que la crise mondiale actuelle est sans précédent. Beaucoup trop de gens sont morts et beaucoup trop de communautés ont été ébranlées à cause de la COVID-19, ce qui entraîne une crise économique et sociale à travers le monde. En effet, la pandémie nous rappelle à quel point notre monde est interconnecté. Si on veut assurer la santé et la sécurité de nos citoyens, on doit vaincre la COVID-19 partout où elle se trouve. Et pour que l'économie mondiale se rétablisse et que nos économies respectives reprennent de la vigueur, on doit avoir un plan exhaustif et concerté. The magnitude of the economic and social shocks brought on by this pandemic have the potential to threaten hard-won gains in many countries, rolling back years of economic growth and pushing tens of millions into extreme poverty. That's why Canada committed funding for humanitarian efforts to the IMF and for the global development of vaccines, treatments, testing, and research. But this crisis highlights many underlying vulnerabilities, both within our societies and within our international system. Right now, countries are also facing rising concerns about climate change, food security, the flight of foreign capital to developed markets, and the sharp falls of revenues from tourism. These challenges only reinforce what we already knew, that global crises disproportionately affect countries in Africa and small island states in the Caribbean and the Pacific. Too often, countries that are vulnerable to external challenges like COVID-19 or natural disasters struggle to access the financing and support they need to manage a crisis and to build back better. That's why UN Secretary General Guterres, Prime Minister Holness of Jamaica, and I convened a discussion last week on how we can emerge from this global crisis as a stronger and more cohesive world. As a result, we formed 6 discussion groups focused on expanding liquidity in the global economy, addressing debt vulnerabilities, creating a space for private sector creditors to be part of the solution of a looming debt crisis, and other issues. The discussion groups will also work on how to fulfill our joint commitments to gender equality and inclusive growth in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not just about talk. The groups will submit concrete proposals for action in mid-July. This is a situation in which the world needs to come together, because not only can we each only defeat the virus once we all defeat the virus, but the interconnectedness of the world, the global supply chains, the levels of links that exist now between our countries mean that beyond just the health crisis, each of us can only prosper when all of us prospers. That's something Canada has long understood, and we're very glad to join you in working on that now. En cette époque incertaine, nos citoyens doivent pouvoir faire confiance au système international. On a besoin d'institutions qui reconnaissent qui est laissé pour compte et qui s'efforcent de les aider. La seule façon d'y arriver, c'est de travailler ensemble en tant que partenaires. C'est comme ça qu'on va bâtir une économie plus forte et plus résiliente. And every step of the way, Canada will be there with you. Merci, mes amis. Thank you again for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that intervention and your continued strong support, especially for the developing world's agenda, and I appreciate your constant commitment. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We'll now see a video message from the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison.
G'day everyone, it's good to join you for this year's summit. This pandemic has been a testing time for all nations, including Australia, but it's also reminded us of the humanity that we share together. We can all learn from each other as we address what has been a twin global health and economic crisis. I'm happy to share our experiences from Australia about what has worked for us. We've made real progress in getting the virus under control, but we have lost, tragically, just over 100 lives from a little over 7,000 cases. Now, we've managed to flatten our curve and slow down the spread of the virus through a combination of important measures. We closed our borders. We put in place quarantine and isolation for Australians returning to our country. This has been absolutely critical, and those arrangements remain in place. Our testing regime has become very significant. Our tracing, including with our app, which ensures that we can automate the tracking down of contacts of those who've had the virus, incredibly important. And of course our physical distancing measures, and for some period of time closing down various parts of our economy and businesses that were connecting very directly with customers. Now, this has been a tremendous effort by the Australian people to get where we are to today, but we know there is still a long way to go. Like everyone else, we have a long and uncertain road ahead. We are in uncharted waters. What we've focused on, and what we are focused on now, is our economy and how we can rebuild our economy by ensuring it is COVID safe. To do that, we've got a three-step approach, which means we can test each step as we go and as we open up our economy more and more in the weeks and months ahead, and doing so in a way that we are staying alert to a further wave that could eventuate. Over 6 million Australians have downloaded that COVID Safe app that I mentioned, and that is a vital tool in automating the tracing of the virus when cases present and ensuring that those who are in contact are isolated. We're also plugged into the global effort to fight the virus and rebuild the world economy. As we help each other respond to the pandemic, Australia will be as true as ever to protect and promote democratic principles and human rights as part of the Commonwealth of Nations. And we welcome the World Health Assembly resolution on COVID-19 that we were so pleased to play a part in sponsoring. We'll work with the global community to help pinpoint the source of the virus and look closely at the global response to see what we can do better next time should we be presented with such a set of circumstances. Australia has also provided $352 million Australian dollars to help the fight against the virus and to find the all-important vaccine. Now, that's on top of some $172 million we contribute every single year towards global work on vaccines and life-saving drugs. As part of that, we're supporting Australia's own world-class medical researchers and institutions who are already working with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations to fast-track a vaccine. We're part of the global effort, and at the same time we're focused on our own neighbourhood, particularly the Pacific, Indonesia and Timor-Leste, our good friends. For Australia, the Pacific countries and our region are family. Our security, prosperity, history and future, they are all deeply intertwined and linked. As this pandemic has become the overriding challenge for our region, we've worked with our Pacific family of nations to also help them through. We've concentrated on health security and economic recovery. We've focused our development assistance on these important COVID fighting goals and protecting the most vulnerable, especially women and girls, and indeed the elderly. We've structured our $4 billion development assistance program to respond quickly to the most acute needs in our region. We're supporting governments to manage the impacts, including sending health experts, testing kits, personal protective equipment and medical supplies. We're supporting laboratories and isolation facilities, public information campaigns, and the World Health Organisation's Regional Preparedness Plan. Now, while travel has all but been grounded, we've opened an essential services and humanitarian corridor to move experts and supplies around our region. And we'll keep working within the Pacific Islands Forum, especially through the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway for COVID-19. Our support builds on a long history of standing together in good times and bad. It goes to the heart of our Pacific Step Up and our firm commitment to a stable and resilient Pacific, where everyone prospers together. So Australia is grateful to be included in this gathering. During these times, we will, in our Pacific family, play our part in the global community also during these unprecedented times. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the very best in these very difficult times.
Thank you very much for that. We appreciate that message from the Prime Minister of Australia. And let me just say that we really, as an organisation, appreciate the support and the commitment to support from our development partners who have joined us in the second part of the segment. But I would like at this stage just to allow for a number of interventions or responses to the statements that we have heard from our partners, starting with President Danny Faure of the Seychelles, followed by our good friend who is still awake, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, representing the Pacific, and then Mia Motley, representing the CARICOM group, and then a final statement from the Africa Chair, Cyril Ramaphosa, representing the African region. Danny, you have the floor.
My dear brothers and sisters, as leaders, we must be bold, be the agents of change as we face the unknown. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed the shortcomings in every country, and global cooperation and solidarity is what will help us address them. The East African region, which Seychelles represents on the ACP Bureau, has the highest number of SIDS in Africa. I am therefore obliged to speak on the behalf of SIDS in the region. The well-documented vulnerabilities of SIDS have become evident during and in the immediate aftermath of the first phases of this crisis. It is apparent that the crisis is likely to have a lasting negative economic impact on our countries. This could further lead to serious negative impacts on social indicators if governments cannot fund a decisive multi-sector response in the next 12 to 18 months. Because of generally high GDP per capita, SIDS cannot access international development aid, including loans at preferential rates to fund their post-COVID-19 recovery and adaptation efforts. Because of the high dependence of SIDS on tourism, the impact of the crisis will induce a significant decline in our economies in 2020, with a substantial increase in unemployment and a drastic drop in the value of their currency. In the face of this global crisis, can the high GDP per capita measure be a reliable indicator for countries with tiny populations? You have heard me before. Some SIDS, like my own country, Seychelles, may have recorded high level of development indicators, But faced with this sudden and unprecedented global crisis, accompanied by an economic shock, our vulnerabilities have aggravated to the level where the support of the international community is badly needed. SEEDS appreciate the support rendered by the United Nations in the initial response to the health crisis. Seychelles, along with many other small island states, however, also requires specific support to weather the crisis and strengthen its capabilities to recover and rebound. SEEDS are in great need of fiscal space to support the recovery efforts. SEEDS need to ensure that they can reopen the economy while preventing the spread of the virus, safeguarding food security, averting an economic crisis, and resuming their progress towards achieving the SDGs. The SEEDS community is therefore calling for an urgent and strong sense of solidarity amongst development partners and stakeholders in finding innovative approaches for helping small island states overcome the crisis. Together, we can use the recovery as a way to shape a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient path to development. Now is the time for us to step up on our South-South and triangular cooperation. No one will help us if we do not help ourselves. But working together in cooperation, in the spirit of solidarity, this is the message that our development partner has spoken today. So I thank you. Going forward, I would like to call upon the OACPS Secretariat to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the main sectors of our respective economies and propose concrete solutions on how to build resilience so that we look to the future with more vigor, optimism, and better preparedness. For instance, the OACPS can opt for raising OACPS bonds internationally, call upon key players in the finance sectors and prominent business companies in the private sector to contribute towards the ACP endowment and trust fund as it becomes operational to assist the OACPS group in meeting their mandate. Mr. President, we have a special relationship with the EU, one that has strengthened over the years. We appreciate the willingness of the EU to consider ways and means of assisting our countries to fight this pandemic and to accompany us in our economic recovery. However, I would like to echo my concern on the EU report on anti-money laundering and terrorist financing, which has branded a set of OACPS and African states as high-risk third countries. Such a unilateral action pursued without consultation with the targeted states will adversely affect those states' economy recovery during such a challenging time. It also erodes the principle of consultation, which should characterize our partnership. I would like to appeal that the EU withholds the publication of its report and accords a moratorium for those targeted states to align their rules and regulation with international norms. I have always valued the strong friendship between our nations based on a profound understanding and appreciation of each other's concerns. These are extraordinary times, and the need for solidarity has never been more urgent. I count on your support. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, President Faure, for that intervention. And I'd like now to give the floor to our good friend from Papua New Guinea, Prime Minister Marape. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
For allowing me to speak. again, and firstly, I thoroughly appreciated the use of technology for this global connectivity in which leaders from the OACP nations are able to converse and speak and share our concerns. Let me also thank our United Nations Secretary General, who was kind to speak to us, as well as the WHO Director General. I also acknowledge our leading nations who support our group of nations, President of France, Prime Minister of Canada, as well as Prime Minister of Australia, who's close to us, and Prime Minister of Norway. Speaking on behalf of my Pacific Island group of nations, we're small nations highly exposed to global catastrophes, issues like climate change, and now this COVID-19 has caused huge damage, not only to our health, but more importantly to the health of our economy. And we appeal for greater consciousness, as I said earlier in my conversation in the evening. We saw one example where we were queuing up to purchase PPE or get our share of PPE supplies when the global supply ran short. Small nations in the Pacific and many smaller nations globally stand exposed to this contest of resources in a global marketplace. I'd like to place on record and lobby for great support to small island states. Papua New Guinea is a little bit bigger. We maybe can outlive this sort of shock. But the small island nations, and more so in the Pacific and Caribbean, and everywhere globally speaking, need great help. And we, whilst asking for great help or placing the need for greater help, let me also thank the helps that we've received thus far. United Nations Family of Help, WHO, UNICEF, for instance, has helped us. I also acknowledge for PNG's case and many Pacific Island nations like Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, USA, Philippines, South Korea, they've all chipped in to help us, and we place on record our appreciation for their interventions in our part of the world. But going forward into the future, I see that small island nations, including Papua New Guinea, will feel the brunt of the stress COVID-19 is causing to economies, globally speaking, but more importantly on a localized economic setting. And I appeal for bigger nations who are partnering us to have in their hearts for small nations like PNG and the other Pacific Island nations. But look, thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for giving the opportunity for us to have this forum. Thank you for convening lovely discussions and for us to have these exchanges. God bless everyone. Good night from Papua New Guinea.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good night. Thank you for staying up so late. I'd like to give the floor now to the Prime Minister of Barbados and Chair of CARICOM, Prime Minister Motley. Mia, you have the floor.
Thank you, my brother. I just want to end up by repeating, in essence, very quickly, that small island states will not make it out of this without cooperation. Earlier, I showed you that the level of economic decline is akin to what was experienced by European countries in World War II. And to that extent, the ability to have a Marshall Plan, rescue them and stabilize them and put them back on a growth plan made all the difference. We in the Caribbean feel as though we are invisible and speaking without persons hearing. I've already drawn the comparison with those people who are on the streets, regrettably, in the United States of America, showing what it feels like to be invisible and not to be heard. I hope and pray that our voices will be heard by those of you, although I note that it is the same faces, and I want to thank the Secretary General of the UN and our friends, Erna and Justin and all of the others who have continued to be on similar calls. But we have to find a way now to broaden the base. And when we add the pandemic to the fact that the hurricane season has started, to the fact that we are in the middle of a drought and also experiencing sargassum. And then we add to that the unfortunate timing of the European Union list that seeks to shame us and to put enhanced due diligence on our countries, not for substantive money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism risk, but because of technical issues that we have already committed to resolving, but for which we will pay a further economic price on top of declines ranging from 11% to 30% of GDP. I want to repeat my friend Danny's call from Seychelles that there ought to be a moratorium on the publishing of these lists. And it affects a number of countries in Africa and the Caribbean, and it comes at the most impropitious of times for us as we fight both the pandemic and indeed the hurricane season. The last point that I'd make is that we need to get the definitions and criteria fixed to say simply that middle-income countries, and everyone talks about supporting the debt restructuring that the G20 has approved. That does nothing to help the middle-income countries who equally, were it not for the intervention of Dr. Tedros, would be excluded also from the professional consortia that are seeking to buy in vitro diagnostics. And we cannot, in ordering 100 pieces here or 1,000 pieces here, have access credibly to any market. So if we are valued members of the global community, I ask our brothers and sisters to work with us in solidarity and partnership, because right now, the region's issues are not being addressed in the last 3 months in any meaningful way, other than with access to Dr. Tedros and the level playing field. The other issues on climate and debt remain unheard, and we hope that we can see progress going forward. Thank you, my brother, and I wish to thank the Secretary General in his first summit for facilitating this for you and for all of us, and I hope that we will have a credible program that can see progress for our people.
Thank you very much, Mia. Really appreciate that. Finally, I'd like to give the floor to the Chairman of the African Union, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, to give his own remarks as well.
Well, thank you very much, Uhuru, President Kenyatta, for really organizing this summit. I'd like to pay tribute to you for the manner in which you also structured the summit and enabled us to have the two segments so that we can also hear from our partners. This is novel, it's wonderful, it's really been a great idea to have this type of summit, and so therefore I pay tribute to you for your leadership as well as you continue to lead us in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, and in Africa, in this organization. We thank you for that. I'd also like to thank the Secretary General, our brother Chikoti, for this organization as well. It's really outstanding, and it keeps us together as a family. Let me thank all the heads of state who have participated. They've really made meaningful ideas, they put them forward, and we really thank them for taking the time to participate in this summit, and also putting forward very clearly, eloquently, and succinctly the views of our different regions, and particularly from the African continent. I'd like to thank my brothers and for the manner in which the views were articulated. But I also want to extend my gratitude for you having brought the Director General of the World Health Organization, as well as the UN Secretary General. They continue to bear the burden of leading the world through this pandemic. And we thank our brother Tedros for the excellent work that he continues to do. And I was delighted to hear that many who spoke are giving enormous support to the WHO and to Dr. Tedros himself, as he continues to lead this fight. And the Secretary General of the UN is a real pillar of strength to all of us as he continues to advocate our causes in whatever he says. I'd like to thank our partners. Our partners were very strong in the views that they articulated here, and I want to pay tribute to each one of them. And the views that we had here today are really encouraging, particularly when it comes to solidarity. That solidarity has to be the way in which the world goes forward. We live in an interconnected world, but we must begin to realize that we are connected by solidarity. And in the end, each one of us can really only prosper when all of us prosper. Those were powerful words that our partners have articulated, and we really welcome that. We also welcome the messages about the debt in our respective regions of the APC. Many of our economies are heavily laden with debt, and the messages have come forward very, very clearly and in an articulate way that debt, there should be standstill for debt, but there should also be a great consideration for debt forgiveness, because this pandemic is having an overbearing impact on the economies of many of our countries, and many of them are going to take very long to recover. Their tourism has been devastated, and there are various other subsidiary industries are going to be devastated for a long time. So it is important that the more developed economy countries must come to the fore. And in fact, we do want the G20 and the G7 to live up to the commitments that they have made. They've made very, very strong commitments about giving support to countries that have debt burdens, and we would like those commitments to be lived up to. So in the end, as we all realize the impact of COVID-19 on various countries and particularly our economies, we say it is only through solidarity that we will all be able to rise together, and we can all prosper if we all work to ensuring that we prosper together. So this, in my view, President Uhuru, has been a very, very successful summit. Powerful messages have come through, and I do hope that there will be follow through, that a number of the messages that have been put forward here will be followed through, and we will begin to see energy being injected to our various economies so that we can rise together. But once again, thank you very much for arranging this summit. I have particularly gained a great deal from this summit, and it's good to know that we are all united in solidarity, and we all want to move forward and improve the lives of our people. So thank you very much for all this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. And I also just want to take this opportunity in concluding to thank all our partners across the globe, all our members from the Pacific who have had to stay up very late, Fiji, Tuvalu, Papua New Guinea, to our other friends and brothers and sisters across in the Caribbean who had to be up very early in order for all of us to be able to have this virtual summit together. I want to thank each and every one of you. I think we've had a very, very fruitful 3 hours together. I think, as President Cyril Ramaphosa has said, there are a lot of very, very, very useful points that have come across that need to be followed up. I want to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his ever-present support for our regions, for our causes, and we thank you terribly, because I don't think he has missed a single opportunity to advance the cause of those who are most vulnerable. We thank you for that support, Secretary General. We also want to thank the Director General of the World Health Organization also for what he has said, and I think one of the things that will come out in our own communique is the position of the Africa, Caribbean and Pacific of our solid support to Dr. Tedros and the World Health Organization. Indeed, as he told us, if one of us fails, we all fail. We can only win this battle if we win it together. This is the time for solidarity, and I think our organization is 100% behind the work and the efforts of the World Health Organization, and they can continue to count on our support. I want to thank all our other development partners, the European Union, who is our lead partner of our organization. I think a good deal has come through. We thank you also for your continued support, but we also want to echo some of the sentiments that have been expressed by some of our partners, Barbados, Seychelles, Jamaica was on the same position, and many others who participated have really emphasized this point of consultation. Consultation, because the true and the truest form of partnership is consultation. And I really would encourage the European Union, really our key partner, and who has supported and worked with us very closely, that we want to improve this issue of dialogue, consultation, as we move forward so that we are moving together. I think finally I want to make a special vote of thanks to the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Norway, the President of France, the Prime Minister of Australia, but in particular those three, because you have ever been strong supporters of our agenda, of our development course. Canada, France, Norway, you have been very strong pillars. But again, I want to echo what Prime Minister Motley said. We also need the others to come on board. We also need the others to come on board, especially the big boys. This is not their time to be fighting their little, because to us they seem petty, but this is not the time to be fighting those things. There are real issues that are affecting millions and millions and millions of us across the globe. We need them to come on board. We need them to work together. We need that solidarity. But we continue to thank you, and I want to repeat again, especially Norway, Canada, and France, for their strong solidarity, and we look forward to continuing to work together with you as we move forward in the days ahead. Finally, thank you very much, each and every one of you, from sacrificing precious time where you would have been doing other things to participate with us. And I want to say thank you, and I think we can conclude what I believe has been a very successful first summit. Secretary General, to you and your Secretariat, just keep up with the great work. There's a good number of things to be followed through, and we shall stay in touch and keep moving forward. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Huru.
Bye all. We done? No.